Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new to my channel, hello, my name is Gabby and welcome. But no matter who you are, thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to hear about the case that I have to share with you guys, and it is a very interesting solved case. But before we get into the case, there is a short word from today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community that has thousands upon thousands of classes that allow your creativity to flourish. It's a place where you can interact with fellow creatives, where you are able to enhance current skills and develop new ones. Skillshare is a membership with meaning. You can dive into such productivity classes as animation, graphic design, illustration, music, photography, or even help build your business with such classes as business analytics and marketing. Creative challenges and productivity classes are a great way to structure your free time and set some achievable and rewarding goals for yourself. So whether you're trying to subside current boredom, manage some stress, focus on some healthcare through learning, or just join a community of people with similar interests, Skillshare is a place for you. Especially during this time with everything going on in the world, I feel like everyone is trying to keep busy in a positive and productive way. When I first got reached out to by Skillshare, I knew immediately that I was going to head for photography. I've always been interested in photography and I really wanted to learn more about it, and I was immediately drawn to Fundamentals of Photo Editing by Justin Bridges. All of his classes are about an hour to an hour and a half long, and he's really easy to understand and breaks everything down with photography in a very simple way to grasp. If you want to check out Skillshare yourself and are interested in photography, I definitely recommend his classes. Skillshare is giving away 2 months free of their premium membership to the first 1,000 people that click the link in the description of today's video. If you're one of the first 1,000 people to click that link in my description and sign up for Skillshare, you get 2 months to dive into their site completely and join as many classes as you want. And then after that, it is only around $10 a month, which I personally think is a steal. So thank you, Skillshare, for sponsoring today's video and sponsoring so many of us YouTubers during this time. Now let's get into the video. So today's video is another hits home video, and if you guys don't know what that is, it is a series that I started on my channel last year, and it's where I take requests from my subscribers and I cover cases that directly affect some of you guys. Whether you knew the victim directly, it was somebody a family or a friend of yours knew, or it was a case that took place in your hometown. Whatever it may be, it affects one of you. Today, I'm going to be covering the solved case of Anita Cobby, and this was requested by a subscriber of mine probably last year named Heather Evans. So thank you, Heather, for requesting this case. I kept your request in a request folder of mine, and I'm finally going through them again. And as soon as I started diving into Anita's case, I knew it's one that I had to cover on my channel. So with all that being said, let's get into the actual case. This is the gruesome yet solved case of Anita Cobby. Anita Lorraine Cobby, born Anita Lorraine Lynch, was born on November 2nd, 1959 to parents Gary Bernard Lynch and Grace Peggy Lynch in Sydney of South New Wales in the beautiful country of Australia. Her father Gary was a graphic artist for the Royal Australian Air Force, and her mother Grace was a nurse. Anita would end up following in her mother's footsteps, becoming a nurse herself. But years earlier, Anita was passionate about something else. That was pageantry. As a teenager, Anita participated in many beauty pageants, even winning the Miss Western Suburbs pageant in November of the year 1979. She was a stunning young woman who could have easily had a career in modeling if she desired, but she had a bigger passion for helping others. She decided to get her nursing degree at Sydney Hospital, a hospital located on Macquarie Street in the Sydney Central Business District, and the oldest hospital in all of Australia, dating all the way back to 1788. While she was studying for her nursing degree at Sydney Hospital, she met a man, and this man's name was John Cobby. and he was 3 years older than her, and he was very handsome, very charming, and she kind of had her eye on him from the second that she saw him. John told News 7 that when he met Anita, he thought she was out of his league. He was in awe of her, that she was just so insanely beautiful. One day, they bumped into each other in a corridor, and Anita struck up a conversation. And he thought, at this moment, he might just possibly have a chance with this gorgeous brunette. So he asked her out for drinks. They went to a restaurant called The Prophet, and they completely hit it off. They fell in love very quickly, and they married on March 27th of the year 1982. Now, they got along really well, but there was one event in their marriage that really affected their relationship deeply. One day, not long into their marriage, Anita found out that she was pregnant, and she was thrilled. Her and John were just over the moon. They were so excited to one day be welcoming a baby into their life. But Anita had a miscarriage, and this just turned her world upside down. Anita and John were having problems in their marriage. They still loved each other deeply. They wanted to figure things out, but they decided that it would be best if they just separated for a period of time, so that's what they did. By the time February of 1986 had rolled around, they had been separated for about 6 weeks now. When they separated, Anita decided that she was going to go live with her parents at their home in Blacktown in New South Wales. According to John, this was just a hiccup in their marriage. They were not going to separate long term. Anita's sister Catherine said that during this time, Anita wanted to really focus on doing things that she knew she would enjoy doing. She wanted to focus on herself and bring more happiness into her life. For instance, Anita actually paid for classes to learn Spanish. She always wanted to learn Spanish, but she would never actually get to start these classes because she died before they ever started. She also wanted to take up art classes because she absolutely loved art. She was an amazing artist and she wanted to learn more. And she talked about wanting to really visit Tasmania Hobart, but these were all things she would never get to do. The week before Anita's murder, Anita and John had actually taken a short trip to the coast of Australia. And this was a trip where they just wanted to focus on each other, kind of rebuild their relationship a little, and remember why they originally fell in love. And this was an amazing trip for them. There was no problems. It was an eye-opening experience for the both of them. It was basically just a trip to help them rekindle their romance, and they left this trip so excited for the future. I'm not entirely sure her family's exact location in Blacktown, but from the Blacktown station to her place of work at the hospital was what looks like to be a little bit over an hour commute. This was a commute that she would take pretty much every day to work while she was living with her parents. The usual routine was that she would get off from work at the hospital, take the train to the station in Blacktown, and phone her father to come pick her up from the station. On February 2nd of the year 1986, Anita decided when she got off from work at Sydney Hospital around 3 p.m. that she was not going to head directly home. She was going to go out with 2 of her friends. She went to an area called Redfern, which was not that far away from Sydney Hospital, and she just spent the day with them, going out to eat and laughing it up, having a good time with her girlfriends. Night had fallen, and Anita decided that it was time to officially head home, and her friend Lynn drove her to the nearest train station. A little after 9 p.m., Anita hopped on a train at Central Railway Station, not far from the Redfern area, and started heading home. She got off the station in Blacktown a little bit before 10 p.m. and when she got off the train, she started walking over to the payphones because this was her usual routine. When she went over to the payphones, she quickly realized that the payphones there were vandalized or out of order. There was no way for her to call her father. When she realized that she couldn't phone her father, she decided to walk next door to the taxi rank and see if there were any taxis in service. When she went over there, there were no taxis in service. So at this point, she made up her mind to just walk home. So she started heading for her parents' house. As Anita was walking alone at night by herself down Newton Road, she was abducted by 5 men. 3 individuals actually witnessed the abduction. A little after 10 p.m., a 13-year-old boy, his younger sister, and their mother heard screaming coming from outside. They rushed outside to see what was going on. Across the street, they saw 26-year-old Anita Cobby being dragged into a white HT Holden Kingswood, kicking and screaming. The boy, without a second thought, ran as fast as he could across the street to help, but the car quickly drove off. The boy ran inside and phoned the police, telling them what he, his sister, and mother had seen. A few moments later, the family's neighbor and his girlfriend drove up to their house, and the boy ran over there and told them what he had seen. The girlfriend got out of the car, and the neighbor decided to go searching around the neighborhood to see if he could find this vehicle that the woman was forced into. A little bit later, the neighbor ended up driving down a road called Reen Road, now called Peter Brock Drive, seeing a parked car resembling the model of car that the abductors drove. He used a flashlight and shined the light in the abandoned vehicle and also in the paddock nearby. For those who don't know, a paddock is a small field or enclosure where horses are kept or put in for a period of time to exercise. The neighbor found nothing and thought that maybe it was the wrong model of vehicle, so he decided to just drive home. Back at home, Anita's parents were not originally concerned. When Anita never called that night to be picked up from the station, they simply thought that she had spent the night at a friend's house. They decided to just head to bed and they went soundly to sleep. And this would probably be the last sound sleep that they would have for a very long time, because the next morning when they woke up is when their nightmare began. Anita was a very kind and ambitious young woman, and she was also very, very responsible. Yes, she was an adult and could do as she pleased, but she would have never left her parents worrying. And she was also not one to simply miss work without a legitimate reason as to why. So when Gary and Grace learned of the news that Anita had not shown up to work the following day of February 3rd, they knew immediately that something was very wrong. The first thing they decided to do is that they were going to phone Anita's sister, Catherine, who was 20 years old at the time, and see if she had heard from Anita in any way. If Anita had called her or stopped by or anything along those lines, if she possibly knew where Anita was. And Catherine said no. The following morning of February 4th, a Tuesday, in the same paddock that the neighbor was searching around during the late hours of Sunday, a farmer heard his cows moving around in confusion. He went to go see what the problem was, and that's when he discovered the lifeless body of Anita Cobby. Anita's nude and very bloody body was identified very quickly due to her unique wedding ring, a Russian-style wedding ring. It was her father who had to come in and identify her body. He collapsed onto his knees when he realized it was in fact his daughter. She had been robbed, beaten, and sexually assaulted. According to the medical examiner's report, her body showed extensive bruising on her head, breasts, face, shoulders, groin, thighs, and legs. It also stated she had a blow of considerable force around her right eye and many cuts on her hand and fingers. Some of those cuts were so deep that they almost severed her fingers. There were no actual stab wounds, though, from a knife going directly into her body. Her cause of death was a very deep cut to her throat, nearly decapitating her. It was determined she most likely died within 2 minutes after the cut due to loss of blood. The public learned of the tragic murder and responded with nothing more than immense anger. The community was shaken up, disgusted, and completely outraged, but their main objective was to do everything they could to find the people responsible. After her body was found, her murder was on the front page of every newspaper, and it was described as the vilest crime of the century. And the New South Wales government decided to post a $50,000 reward for anyone who could come forward with any information that would help lead to an arrest in this case. At the start of the case, obviously, like in most cases, they look at the people closest to the victim, and they narrowed in on her husband. Well, John Cobby did tell police that he was devastated over her murder, and he said that he and Anita were actually trying to work things out. Those are, of course, just words, but police, in the end, did cross him off the suspect list. After Anita's murder, John really spiraled downward. He was in a very dark place. He is open about this in interviews, but he started using drugs. He didn't want to be alive without her. The first thing that police decided to do was they were going to reenact Anita's last movements the night that she was murdered. Constable Debbie Wallace came up with the idea of dressing up as Anita, wearing similar clothes to what she was wearing on February 2nd, and take the exact train that she took from the Central Railway Station to the Blacktown Station. On February 9th, she hopped on the 9:12 train with the hopes that doing this would jog someone's memory along the way. As she took Anita's last journey, her colleague questioned passengers on the train, seeing if any of them remembered seeing Anita that night. That possibly someone had some information to bring forward. A very spine-chilling experience for Debbie Wallace, but all in all, nothing much came of this effort. Anita's case was run by Sergeant Ian Kennedy, and he was a very respected detective back in his day. In the end, it took police about 3 weeks to track down, arrest, and charge the men responsible for Anita's heinous murder. Police Chief Inspector Gary Raymond said, "People were ringing up the station every day, asking why we hadn't caught who murdered her. The community went into lockdown. Everyone was terrified, afraid they would be the next victim. Men went to workplaces to pick up their wives, girlfriends, daughters, or sisters. Blacktown had never been so quiet on the streets." Police received a tip about a stolen vehicle, a white HT Holden Kingswood. Police started searching for a group of 5 men who were said to be responsible for stealing the car. The group of 5 men had a history of violence. The men were John Raymond Travers, Michael Murdoch, and 3 brothers. The 3 brothers were Michael Murphy, Leslie Murphy, and Gary Murphy. These 5 men, from many sources, were described as nobodies. They were small-town criminals living in Sydney's western suburbs. They would go from small crimes worth maybe a night or 2 in jail to a crime that would outrage an entire country. They would become the most hated group of men in all of Australia. February 21st, John Raymond Travers and Michael Murdoch were at Travers' uncle's home when police came in to arrest them. Leslie Murphy was back at Travers' home when police arrested him. They brought all 3 of them down to the station, and all 3 of them were charged with stealing the vehicle. But it was John Travers who started giving conflicting answers when he was questioned about the murder of Anita Cobby. So police decided to keep him a little bit longer for questioning. While in police custody, Travers wanted a cigarette. So he asked to phone a friend to bring him down some to the station. Police agreed, and Travers gave them the number of this so-called friend. This friend was not a friend at all, it was actually his aunt, who would go by the name Miss X. Police talked to Miss X and told her the situation. She agreed to try to help police in their investigation the best that she could. His aunt did something that I personally respect her doing, and it's something that I feel like a lot of family members, if they were put in this predicament, they might not have done. There are many cases out there where a lot of family members are unfortunately very blinded to the fact that their own family member, flesh and blood, can be responsible for a very heinous crime. John Travers' aunt, Miss X, she talked to police, and police told them all about Anita's murder and how strange John Travers, her nephew, was acting when he was questioned about the murder. And she immediately thought back to characteristics that John Travers possessed growing up. She told authorities that she was going to try to help in the investigation as much as she could, whether it was to get the truth out that John Travers had something to do with the murder or completely clear him. She decided to hide a microphone on her and go speak to him herself. Police strapped the microphone to her and she went back to go speak to her nephew, brought him the cigarettes, and they started talking. Within no time, she got a full confession from him. His full confession was on tape, and they charged him, Michael Murdoch, and Leslie Murphy with the murder of Anita Cobby. But there were two other people involved as well, and that was Leslie's brothers, Michael and Gary. At this time, they had John Travers, Michael Murdoch, and Leslie Murphy. But Michael Murphy and Gary Murphy, brothers to Leslie Murphy, were still at large. Within no time, the two men's faces were plastered on every newspaper and being broadcast on every news station. Police received a tip not long after that there were two individuals fitting their description that were hiding out in a flat in Glenfield. Police found Michael inside the flat watching TV, arrested him, then tried to arrest Gary, and he tried to make a run for it, not making it very far before being tackled to the ground. Right now, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about each of the men responsible for Anita's murder. First, we'll start with John Raymond Travers. He was 19 years old at the time of his arrest, and he was considered to be the ringleader of the group. Growing up, he had lived a poor life in Blacktown and was the oldest of 8 children. By high school, he was an alcoholic and was very disorderly in school. He was known as a troublemaker, to say the least. He could barely hold down a job because of his unruly behavior, and eventually ended up being committed to a juvenile detention facility called Boys Town. After his mother's health had gotten too bad, he and his siblings were put into foster care. He got most of his money from unemployment checks and would steal food so he could be able to eat. He also had a teardrop tattoo below his left eye. Travers was described by police as quote-unquote a psychopath, and from my research on John Raymond Travers, I would say that I have to agree. There's one incident besides the murder of Anita Cobby that might prove this to be true, and that is that one time John Raymond Travers was invited to a barbecue. He brought a live goat to the barbecue to be killed and then, of course, barbecued, but in front of everybody, he slit the goat's throat and sexually assaulted the goat at a barbecue in front of a large group of people. Absolutely disgusting to think about, and I hate having to even include that in this video, but I want to just make it known the type of person that John Raymond Travers is. The next is Michael Murdoch, who at the time of his arrest was 18 years old. He was a longtime friend of John Travers and was described as his quote-unquote partner in crime. He also spent a lot of time growing up in juvenile facilities, just like Travers. In these facilities, he would be sexually assaulted, resulting in him becoming more angry at the world and furthering his hatred. Michael Murphy is the first of the Murphy brothers. He was the oldest of the killers at 33 years of age during his arrest. He was also the oldest of all the Murphy children, 9 in all. He was as troubled as the rest, so much so that at the age of 12, he was sent to live with his grandmother. The second Murphy brother involved was Gary Murphy. He was 28 years of age at the time of his arrest, and he's most known for wetting himself as he was being arrested by police. Gary was known for having a very bad temper, and he had a love for cars, which led him to many car theft charges before his arrest for Anita Cobby's murder. The last of the 5 is Leslie Murphy, the youngest of the Murphy brothers. He was 22 years old at the time of his arrest. Out of all 5, he was known as being the one filled with the most anger and the worst temper. Before the murder, he had been charged with many theft charges, just like his brother Gary. The Murphy family was known in the area of New South Wales, especially by police, as just being trouble. The Murphy brothers had actually met John Raymond Travers when they themselves were causing trouble around some hotels in the Doonside area. Something about this case that makes it so much more spine-chilling is that the night that the neighbor had drove down Rain Road and had seen that vehicle parked on the side of the road, abandoned, that looked like a white HT Holden Kingswood, and he went to shine a flashlight in it and see if he could see anything, and then checked the paddock nearby. The 5 men were actually hiding in the tall grass nearby the paddock and the abandoned vehicle. They were crunched down in the high grass, waiting for the unknown man to leave. The trial for the murders began on March 16th of the year 1987. And during each trial, there were large, and I mean large, groups of protesters outside the courthouse. There were some people outside holding up signs saying that they refused to pay taxes to keep these 5 men in prison, that they simply want them dead. They want them to have the death penalty for what they did to Anita Cobby. It was complete and utter chaos. Now, at the beginning of the trials, the 5 men as a whole decided that they were going to all plead not guilty. But at the last second, John Raymond Travers decided that he was going to plead guilty to completely avoid a trial altogether. Anita's parents attended every day of the trial, and they were described as having great class. Authorities were a bit scared before the trials began because of the lack of security. Sometimes it's needed during a time when emotions are running at an all-time high, and you never know how a parent could react with seeing their child's killers. Gary and Grace, though, remained calm, even during times they had to stand near the killer's lawyers. The thing about this case is that there is no evidence. There's no DNA evidence. There's no cold, hard facts that prove these 5 men took the life of Anita Cobby. It is just solely based on confessions. The jury had to make their final decisions based on the words coming out of the 4 men's mouths. But there were rules to go by. The confession of one accused could not be used to go against another accused. Everyone's statements during the trial could only be used to prove their own guilt, not another's. This was seen as a fair way to view a confession. It was used so a person confessing could only describe how they were involved and not start deciding halfway through the trial that they simply wanted to completely shift the blame to another individual. That it was for the jury to decide in the end the accountability of each person being accused. But there is a tiny exception to this rule. That is, if the co-accused agrees with another individual's confession. This is a strategy that is at times discouraged, is used to get offenders to agree with each other's confessions, even while also implicating themselves. The trial revolved around 3 things though. 1, the involvement of the accused. 2, the extent of the involvement of the accused. And 3, deciding the extent of legal liability, whether the accused should be found guilty of murder or manslaughter. At the beginning of the questioning of the 5 men, Michael Murdoch and the Murphy brothers all tried to pin the entire crime on John Raymond Travers. They claimed they were there, but Travers was the one who was responsible for the murder itself, that Travers had the knife and acted by himself. According to Michael Murphy, as they drove by Anita, it was Travers that looked at her and said that he wanted her. 2 of the 5 men jumped out of the car and dragged her into the stolen vehicle. All 5 of them robbed her, beat, and sexually assaulted her. Michael Murphy, though, wanted to make it seem like he was her almost savior. He told how he wanted Travers to let her go, but there was no way Travers was going to, because Travers claimed that the woman knew their faces and knew their names and would surely tell authorities of what happened to her and who was responsible. Travers himself agreed that that was what made him finally decide to end her life. Michael Murphy claimed the four of them walked away from Travers and Anita and made their way back to the car. He claimed that not long after, Travers showed up to the car, covered in blood, and said, "I slit her throat. It's me first one." Michael was insistent that Travers was a maniac, that he was the main one to blame. The entire event, from when they abducted her to her taking her last breath, was about 2 hours. The court was told that on the night of Anita's murder, John Travers' neighbor, a woman named Maxine Greensmith, had smelled burning. She looked next door to see a fire burning in John's backyard, and all 5 men were surrounded around the fire, drinking beer and talking extremely loud for the time of night. Some of the men told authorities that they had been burning Anita's clothing and belongings in Travers' incinerator. The 4 men tried their hardest to convince the jury that they had as little involvement in the beating and murder of Anita Cobby as they possibly could. Like I said before, the community of New South Wales and even all of Australia were completely mortified by what these 5 men did to this young woman. But other than the actual murder, there was something that also added to their anger. It was the way that the 4 men acted in court. They acted like buffoons. They were snickering and giggling and laughing, and when the judge went over the autopsy report of Anita Cobby, they had no remorse. This case was very difficult to handle. Of course, all these 5 men were involved. There's no way getting around that, but it was trying to determine the extent of each one's involvement. June 10th, 1987 would be the day that there was a final decision made in this case. The trial had lasted 54 days. The trial started later than expected this day due to Anita's parents not being there, but a little after 10 a.m., they proceeded anyway. By the time her parents got there, all that was left was the final verdict. For the first time since the trial began, all 5 men accused were standing at the front of the courtroom waiting for the statements that would determine the rest of their lives. Everyone knew that they had to have been found guilty, but there was a slight wonder that it possibly wouldn't be life in prison, though. That was the worry everyone held in the back of their minds. The 5 men were found guilty of murder and received life in prison. To be specific, they received, quote, the penal servitude for life, unquote, meaning life in prison with intense, hard labor. After the court settled down, after the uproar in responses to the verdict, Judge Alan Maxwell passed along the rest of the sentences. On top of the life sentences, 16 years for kidnapping, 17 years for robbing and wounding, 12 years for conflicting harm on an individual due to sexual assault, and, to top it all off, 5 years for theft of a motor vehicle. He ended it by saying, quote, the circumstances of these prisoners and the circumstances of the murder of Anita Lorraine Cobby prompt me to recommend that the official files of each prisoner should be clearly marked never to be released, end quote. For Anita's family and friends and all her loved ones, it was a bittersweet moment because they were beyond thrilled to see her killers behind bars, but in the end, they were still without Anita. This was something that, all in all, should have never happened. Anita's sister, Catherine, who was 5 years younger than Anita, said in an interview with the Daily Telegraph that she hopes to never see the day that the 5 men be freed from prison. She said, I do wonder sometimes what my life would be like today if I had my sister here with me. I imagine she would have gone on to have children. We'd be, no doubt, sharing time together, and the cousins would be our bond as sisters, and we would have continued doing things together. She would have wanted us to get on with our lives, for sure, because that's what she was all about, living life. Because of Catherine, a park in Sullivan Street in Blacktown was named Anita Cobby Reserve in her memory. When it comes to Anita's parents, they have both since passed away. They obviously did get something that a lot of parents don't get, and they did see some justice served in their child's case. Gary passed away from Alzheimer's disease at 80 years old in the year 2008. Grace passed away from lung cancer at the age of 88 in 2013. After losing a child in any way, a lot of parents fall apart, and it's something that you cannot blame them for. It happens because losing a child puts so much stress on a relationship. It is the most heartbreaking thing that parents can go through. And it does really put a lot of weight on a marriage especially. But Grace and Gary, they tried their hardest to keep their marriage as strong as possible, and they stayed together a total of 54 years from the time that they were married to the time that Gary passed away. One thing that some people find coincidental is that 54 is the number of years that Gary and Grace had stayed together, and 54 is also the number of days that Anita's trial had lasted. In Anita's memory, her family did a lot of good. For instance, her parents and the parents of murder victim Ebony Simpson decided to create the Homicide Victims Support Group in Australia, a group dedicated to helping families deal with very heinous crimes. In the year 2015, Catherine held a memorial for Anita at the Anita Cobby Reserve, and during this memorial, they all told people to, instead of bringing flowers, make a donation to the 20th Man Fund. It is a fund used to help disadvantaged youth. Its goal is to ultimately take young men coming from broken situations and help boost their self-esteem, get them work, and support them emotionally and mentally so they don't go down a path of violence and crime, just like the people responsible for Anita Cobby's murder, to hopefully start at the roots so it doesn't stem into anything more in later years. The year right now is 2020, and I'm sure a lot of you guys watching this video are quite curious where the 5 pieces of human garbage are in today's time, and if people's fear of them ever being released from prison could possibly come true. We'll start with the ringleader himself, John Raymond Travers. He was originally housed in Wellington Correction Center under maximum security, then was later transferred a year later in 1988 to Maitland Jail. Then in 1992, transferred to Goulburn Correctional Center. During a transportation in 1996, though, to the hospital at Long Bay Correctional Complex, he attempted to escape from the prison van used to transport prisoners. He used a hacksaw to saw through the back door of the van, then kicked it open. Him and another prisoner in the back of the van attempted to run out of the back of the van and get away from the van without the drivers of it witnessing them doing this. But they ran out and they didn't make it very far before being caught up to, arrested, and charged. So he was definitely not a model prisoner. He spent time at Lithgow Correctional Center and then finally ended up at Wellington once more. Michael Murdoch and the Murphy brothers all spent time, just like Travers, in many different prisons, sometimes going between being held in maximum security to being held in medium security. Michael Murdoch, Leslie Murphy, and Gary Murphy were very much like John Travers when it came to their moments of acting up. Michael Murdoch getting in trouble for having a cell phone in his cell in the year 2008, Leslie getting in trouble for failing a urine test once, and Gary getting into his own trouble through the years. And in 2019, he was actually beaten so bad by other prisoners that he was left in critical condition. As for Michael Murphy, the oldest of the Murphy brothers, his story was similar to the others when it came to being transported to different prisons through the years, but out of the 5, he tried to keep out of trouble. He was quiet and kept to himself. Out of the 5, he is the only one not alive in today's time. He passed away on February 21st of 2019 from terminal cancer. So John Travers, Michael Murdoch, and Gary and Leslie Murphy are all in prison still to this day. It is unknown to the public what facilities they are currently in, but we do know that they are all held right now, at the time I'm making this video, in maximum security. Right now, I have to bring up a little bit of a downer in this video, a bit of terrifying news, and that is that there is a possibility that the 4 remaining men in prison serving time for her murder could possibly be released. The New South Wales Bar Association, which is a group of lawyers in New South Wales that are responsible for the regulation of the legal profession in the state of New South Wales, are basically trying to switch things up when it comes to the meaning of a life sentence. To break this down for my viewers, they are backing the idea that an inmate could be released after a long time if they prove to be changed. If they were good prisoners through the years and show to be different individuals than they were when they were convicted of their crimes. This was basically put into motion after pedophile and child murderer Michael Guider was released from prison on September 5th of 2019. According to Wikipedia, he was released but under strict conditions and extended supervision orders. This is a man with many prior sex offense charges and went on to abduct and murder a 9-year-old little girl named Samantha Knight in 1986, who he, might I add, never ended up leading police to where the body could be found, and he was released from prison. Someone with over 60 other child offenses. Let that sink in. Under these proposed changes by the New South Wales Bar Association, they could go over the cases of every person in New South Wales serving a life sentence and see if they are worthy of being released to the public. Some of the men that they would take another look at to see if they qualify for being released into the public again are the 4 men that are serving time for Anita Cobby's murder, which I find absolutely horrific. Right now, in this case, people are praying and hoping with everything in them that these 4 men are never released and do serve the entire rest of their lives behind bars, while also they are trying to keep the memory of Anita Cobby alive. John Cobby, Anita Cobby's husband, who was able to pull through his dark moments, and congratulations to him, he told MSN.com in June of 2019 that he is honestly surprised her killers had not had their own lives taken in prison already. He says that he says sorry to his wife every single day. Sorry that he wasn't there with her on the night her life was taken. Through the years, some of the top psychiatrists in all of Australia have sat down and talked to these 5 men responsible for Anita's murder, and they tried their hardest to break everything down and try to understand why these 5 men had no sympathy for another human being. Why did these 5 men who grew up having very tough upbringings turn out the way that they did? And some other people in the world who had even tougher upbringings turn out to be good people doing good deeds who would never think of murdering a young woman. This is something that psychiatrists have wondered for a very long time, and it poses the question, are some people just born evil? And that's a question that I want to ask my subscribers in today's video. Let me know down in the comments below. I've never asked this question on my channel before, but do you think that some people are just born with a little bit of evil in them? I'm going to use serial killers as an example. There are some serial killers in this world serving time that had very devastating upbringings. They were sexually assaulted, abused, and this ultimately deteriorated their mental state, and they became very angry at the world, and they took that anger and they forced it onto people around them, and they took the lives of many human beings. But there are some serial killers very twisted and maniacal with their murders, and they had upbringings that were perfectly fine. They have no traumas from their childhood or teenage years or adulthood that ultimately added to them turning out that way. All in all, the human mind is extremely complex, and all of this just really gets you thinking. But I just have to say that I agree with Anita's loved ones when I say I hope these 4 men stay behind bars for the rest of their lives. I am also extremely interested in your all's opinions when it comes to what the New South Wales Bar Association is trying to do with looking over cases of people who are serving life sentences to see if they are changed enough to be back in public. What do you all think when it comes to that? Do you think that people can change? Do you think that over a period of time they can become a better person and be able to live out in society and never do a horrible crime again? Or do you think that they are the same person deep down that they were when they were arrested? That possibly being out in the world again may trigger them and they could do the same thing and end up behind bars again. In an article posted by the Daily Telegraph in March of this year, the Bar Association said in the submission, the crushing nature of a natural term life sentence with no prospect of release from prison has been long recognized, particularly for young offenders who, given the general rate of life expectancy, could potentially spend 50 years or more in prison. It also said, predicting future dangerousness of a criminal is notoriously difficult and should be reassessed in the future. If passed, the submission could cover all 49 life sentences currently being served in the state. Legal Aid New South Wales said families of victims would need support and assistance to properly understand the redetermination process. Samantha Knight's mother, Tess, wrote in the submission, the only way a convicted killer can satisfy their debt to society is for society to ensure no other person is ever exposed to the risk of being killed by a convicted murderer. With all that being said, if you did make it to the end of this video, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, letting me know you stayed for the whole video and that you also kind of like what I'm doing here on my channel. And again, thank you Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Like I said at the beginning, for $1,000 to click that link in the description of my video, 2 months free of premium membership on their site. And if you yourself have any hits home cases that affect you directly, make sure to leave those as well down in the comments of today's video. And I will see you guys in my next one. Bye guys.